We change leaders every day in Africa. But tell me one African country that changed a leader and things changed. We might see some improvement, but fundamentally, nothing changes. This was all by design. They found an amazing continent with everything and anything the world could ever need, well-established religious and educational systems. And they wondered, how on earth can we ever conquer such an amazing continent unless we come up with a strategy that will see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated.
Hello, Africa is Marwa supporters. Welcome back to another episode of Africa is Marwa. If you're coming for the first time, this is where we highlight the true Pan-African voices. And if you haven't subscribed yet, kindly do so. And also, don't forget to hit on that notification bar so that anytime I do a video, you are able to get it on your timeline. So, today I want us to focus on our own Mama Africa, Dr. Chihombori Kwao, where she highlights some of the key root causes of, Africa's fake independence. And so many countries in Africa have had independence for more than 60 years, but some of the challenges that are facing Africa are still the same. And as she will highlight in the video, talk about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Why haven't we had this effected for all these years? And talk about some of the systems that we've had the colonizers left us. Why haven't we strengthened them? Why do we even think that they are the right ones, aside from the ones that we can have on our own in the African continent? So I want us to take some few minutes, actually 30 minutes, to listen to this powerful speech that Dr. Arikana had, and especially for the African diaspora, because we believe that many of our expertise in Africa have gone to the diaspora, and they're taking all this expertise with them to the diaspora, leaving Africa behind.
Once upon a time, our beloved continent was the center of the earth, was the center of the world. Once upon a time, our beloved continent was this beautiful tree of life that gave life not only to humanity, but to life in general as we know it. Invaders came to our beloved continent centuries ago, and they started messing with this tree of life that is Africa. We must understand the tree that was, the tree that gave life to the world. We need to understand what has been done to this tree to take it to where we have the Africa that is no longer the center of the world. When we understand what has been done to Africa, it makes it easier for us to strategize on how we can undo the damage, the destruction that has befallen our motherland, the African tree of life. I think it's clear that we understand for this tree to have issues. The issues are either issues above the ground, which is what they have mostly wanted us to focus on, versus issues below the ground, which are really the pivotal issues, the issues that they strategized to see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. Allow me to classify the issues, the reasons why this tree of life that is Africa is ailing. And I'm going to divide the issues between the two. Problems that are causing this tree to ail, but problems above the root, above the ground. And issues that are making this tree ail that are below the ground, issues of the root. Quite often, we are focusing on the issues above the root, issues above the ground. Issues like the leaves and the flowers and the fruits and the branches that are falling off one season after another. Those issues like leadership, issues like corruption, issues like poor access to healthcare, poor education, poor infrastructure. Those are all issues above the ground. They come and they go. We change leaders every day in Africa. But tell me one African country that changed a leader and things changed. We might see some improvement, but fundamentally, nothing changes. This was all by design. Where we are lacking in our understanding of our Africa is the issues below the ground, the issues of the root, the issues that were predetermined by those who came to colonize Africa, those who came to settle in our beloved continent. Remember, when they came to Africa, the settlers, they found an amazing continent with everything and anything the world could ever need, well-established religious and educational systems. And they wondered, how on earth can we ever conquer such an amazing continent unless we come up with a strategy that will see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. I repeat, unless they came with a strategy that would see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. To start with, when the colonizers came to Africa, we didn't have the issue of color. Black and white did not exist in our languages. We were Africans. The missionaries were sent in with specific instructions to make the Africans believe that everything African was bad and everything European was better and more desirable. They put in motion a process of making us dislike that which was ours and go all out to embrace what the new invader was bringing to our beloved continent. I have to give it to them. They did a very good job at doing that. They hit us where it hurt the most, the mind. The missionaries taught us about white angels. The missionaries taught us about the devil who was black. The missionaries are white, like the angels. And that when we go to church, we must worship the white angels. And definitely want nothing to do with the black devil who looks like us. Subliminal messaging. Subliminal messaging. That's where we began the self-hate, the mistrust of each other, the lack of appreciation, an idea that is coming from your brother, an idea that is coming from your sister, because we are taught to dislike anything to do with us. That, my brothers and sisters, was level one, number one level of destroying the African, the mind. Then they followed it with colonization, a systematic way of saying now that we have made the African believe that everything African was bad and everything European was better, let's take it to the next level. So it is that they met in Berlin and decided to chop up our country, our continent rather. So it is they met in Berlin, Germany, at the invitation of the then Chancellor of Germany, Bismarck, specifically to come up with a strategy that once again would see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. They spent 4 months, 4 cold months in Berlin, Germany, from November of 1884 to February of 1885. And by the time they were done, our Africa had been chopped up into the tiny little countries that we see today. Countries that were intentionally divided in such a way that individually they will never survive. That individually they are easy to exploit. The whole purpose was to see to it that they can continue to exploit the rich natural resources that we were endowed with in our beloved continent. A united Africa is an Africa that is difficult to exploit. An Africa that speaks with one voice is an Africa that is difficult to exploit. So it is what they came up with, their strategy of 1884 during the Berlin Conference, is what gave us the Africa that we have today. An Africa that has countries like Benin, countries like Togo, countries like Central Africa Republic, Niger. As a matter of fact, all African countries. Then they turned around and said, okay, here we are. You are independent countries. Of course, during the Berlin Conference and during colonization, every one of those countries was controlled from those capitals in Europe until independence, when our Pan-African fathers began to say there's something wrong with this picture. We can no longer continue to be subservient in our own continent. So they began to push back. And this is what led us to get the fake independence, where we were given political liberation, limited political liberation to this day. But what they kept and never let go, which brings me to issue number 3 of the root, was the economic liberation. You see, you got to understand that when we were under colonization, the companies that ran the economies of all African countries were companies that belonged to the colonizer. If a country was colonized by the British, the majority of the companies that controlled the economies of those countries were British. If you were colonized by the Germans, German companies. If you were colonized by the French, French companies, and so forth. That, my brothers and sisters, they never gave up. They still continue to control the economies of their former colonies to this day. Let's go back and summarize where we are so far. The issues of the root. They messed with our mind. Berlin Conference. They divided us up, chopped up into tiny little economies that simply cannot survive on their own. And thirdly, in the name of giving us liberation, they never actually left our beloved continent. Economic liberation was denied the Africans to this day. If you go into any African country today, the majority of the employers are multinational companies from those colonies, former colonies, who never left at independence in the 1950s to 60s. The colonizers have never left Africa. Issue number 3 of the root. In the 1940s, they created the Bretton Woods institutions. The Bretton Woods institutions were created with the fair understanding that their success was based on the failures of the developing countries, the majority being in Africa. So it is the international monetary policies are skewed in such a way that African countries are forever going to be paying debt they will never finish paying off. The average African country, as we speak today, spends about 1/3 of their GDP on loan repayment. How can a country survive? It's all by design. Countries that have never defaulted on their loan repayment, and yet the rating agencies continue to give them poor ratings so that they can justify giving them high interest loans. We must understand the international finance system and how it is keeping their knees on the necks of the African countries. The international finance system must be analyzed, and we're asking those involved to give Africans a break, and that we must treat Africa fairly. We must demand that. Issue number 4 of the root. The international trade policies. You see, the continent still has 80% of its natural resources. Africa is the continent where the rest of the world is going to for their needs. Gold, check. Diamonds, check. Oil, check. Coltan, check. Copper, check. The list goes on. It's all in our beloved Africa. And the world wants it. The world wants our natural resources. Here is the problem. Going back to the Berlin Conference, the international trade policies make it very difficult for African countries to add value to our natural resources. Hence, as we speak today, the majority of the natural resources coming out of Africa leave Africa without value addition. Have you ever wondered, why is it that over 65% of the world cocoa beans come from West Africa. And yet, it's only recently, past couple of years, that we started seeing a few factories manufacturing chocolates. It was all by design, thanks to the unfair trade policies. Have you ever wondered, why is it that we get coffee and tea from Switzerland? Have you seen the large coffee fields in Switzerland? A good portion of that is coming from our beloved continent, East Africa. Why are we not questioning the large quantities of coffee and tea coming out of certain countries when they are not growing that much coffee, when they are not growing that much tea in their countries? Why are these countries allowed to get away with relabeling African products as their own? It's all by design. The world trade policies that give a blind eye to atrocities that are being committed on our beloved continent. That's issue number 5 of the root. We must understand the international trade policies and how they are keeping Africans from creating the much needed jobs in our beloved continent. You take, for example, coltan alone. If we were to say every item, every microchip that requires coltan must be manufactured in Africa, that means that microchip in your cell phone, in your laptop, in our electric cars, the list goes on. That alone could create millions of jobs for the Africans, so we can no longer talk about unemployment for our youth. That alone. Have you ever wondered, if we were to say everything that requires chocolate must be manufactured in Africa, do you know how many jobs we could create? Those who are manufacturing chocolates outside Africa, all they're adding is water and milk. Do people even know that? Does the world even know that? Cities are built out of African cocoa beans. Does the world know that? Why is that being allowed? It's the unfair trade policies. I could go on and on and on about the natural resources out of Africa that are creating jobs for the rest of the world. That has got to change. And we African diaspora must understand it, appreciate it, and do something about it. Issue number 6. See, we all talk about, we want change in Africa. We want better health care. We want better education. We want better infrastructure. Well, guess what? No amount of money put into Africa will give us the health care we desire. Why? It's because the majority of the healthcare workers are outside Africa. Like I often say, there are more Ghanaian doctors in New York City than in Ghana, the country. There are more Nigerian doctors in Los Angeles than in the country of Nigeria. How then do you improve healthcare if there are no doctors? Let's be realistic, my brothers and sisters. This is a moment for you to stop and think. We can't expect quality healthcare to just happen out of nothing. We have to participate. The capacity that Africa needs to build the Africa that we want, to build a sustainable Africa, is in the diaspora. And that's you and I, my brother and sister. The brain drain that has occurred in Africa over the past 400 years must be reversed. There is no two ways about it. We have got to make a decision as the children of Africa in the diaspora. We must understand our Africa. We must understand the issues that are causing this tree of life that is Africa to be ailing to the extent that it is. The issues above the root and issues below the root of this tree. Allow me to summarize them, because it is important that we understand them. Because when we fully appreciate what is going on in Africa, we will stop being thrown a shiny object and run after the shiny object, while the real issues are in the opposite direction. 1, leadership. 2, corruption. 3, poor access to healthcare, poor educational systems, poor infrastructure. Those are issues above the ground. Those are the flowers and the fruits and the leaves and the branches. If they allow, or rather, if we allow ourselves to concentrate on issues above the ground and totally ignore the issues below the ground, which are, once again, the mind. By that I'm talking about the legacy of colonization and the legacy of slavery, the legacy that makes us believe we are inferior to others and that what we do is inferior to what those from the Western world do. We must heal from the disease of the legacy of slavery and colonization. Our minds must wake up. Secondly, the Berlin Conference and what that meant when they divided Africa up into the 10 little economies. China cannot go into the same boxing ring with Benin. The United States cannot go into the same boxing ring with Central African Republic. It simply doesn't make sense. It was all by design. Then the colonizers, who never left our Africa, they continue to control the economies of all African countries to this day. And until the African has control of our own economies, nothing we want to do is going to give us the Africa that we need, the sustainable Africa that we want. We must own the factories that manufacture our fabrics. We must own the brick plant that's making the bricks that we need to build our houses. We must build our own planes. We must build our own airports. We must build and own the railway lines and the trains. Manufacturing is where it's at. We must own the fundamentals of our economies in Africa. Sadly, the multinationals that go back to colonization have never left our beloved Africa. Issue number 3. Issue number 4, the international finance policies that disadvantage developing countries, the majority of those countries being in Africa. The international trade policies that are so unfair to developing countries. And once again, the majority are in Africa. And as we speak today, Africa is where everybody is going. All other parts of the world are going for their needs. And last but not least, the brain drain. Here, my brothers and sisters, you should own this. If we don't come together and speak with one voice, if we don't come together and realistically look at the issues that are causing this African tree to ail, we have no one to blame but ourselves. And so now I have described the issues, the causes for this African tree of life to be in the intensive care. I can tell you the solutions are easy. Once we understand what is being done to our tree, once we understand why this tree of life is not giving us the sweet, juicy fruits like it used to once upon a time, what this moment is calling for, my brothers and sisters, is for unity. Unity among black people. Unity of purpose. If we do not unite as black people, we will continue to be the most disrespected race on earth. You know it. I don't have to overemphasize that. The question I have for you is, are you happy with the status of black people today on earth? Are you happy with the world the way it is today? Are you happy living this world the way it is for your children, grandchildren, and generations to come? I hope. The answer is no. 20 years from now, your children and grandchildren are going to ask you, grandfather, grandmother, there were issues with our beloved continent, Africa. There were problems with the race, our race, as black people. What did you do, grandmother? What did you do, grandpa? For you to be able to answer that question, that journey begins now. My hope is 20 years from now, you can say, granddaughter, grandson, sit down. These were the issues in our beloved Africa. These were the issues with black people. Together with my brothers and sisters, we came together. We pulled our financial resources together. And this is what we did. While the mission is not yet accomplished, this is where we left off. And this is where you, together with your brothers and sisters, need to come together and pick up where we left off. But we should also guarantee them two things. One, they will always have our shoulders to stand on. And secondly, we will always have their back. The journey to be able to answer that question to our children and grandchildren begins today. ADDI is the entity that I've created. So we can all come together as children of Africa in the diaspora and speak with one voice and realistically discuss issues pertaining to our beloved continent, issues pertaining to our race, and why we must once and for all let the world know that black people are saying, no more shall we continue to be disrespected. No more shall Africa continue to be exploited. And no more shall we be treated as second-class citizens. African Diaspora Development Institute is the entity that is going to be the bridge between the children of Africa in the diaspora and our beloved continent of Africa. It is important that we speak with one voice. The rule of divide and conquer has been winning among us for far too long. The issue of a divided Africa, the issue of a divided people of African descent around the globe is an issue that we and only we can address and take care of. Naturally, you don't expect those who set out to divide us to do something about it. So not only do we need to unite, and for unity, I'm asking you to go to ADDI, ADDI.org, and register. Registration is free. We just want to be able to reach out to you and begin to get you to be part of what is going on and how we can come together and do something about our beloved Africa, how we can come together and build the Africa that we want, how we can come together and build a sustainable Africa. Until we participate in the building of Africa, sustainable Africa is never going to be built. Those who sought out to exploit Africa, they built an Africa that worked for them. The Africa they built never worked for us. So we must build the Africa that we want. And once we unite, the next thing is financial resources. We are not poor people by any stretch of imagination. To women I say, look at how many clothes, handbags, dresses, shoes in your closet that still have tags on. Can you imagine if everybody committed to $83 a month and we get 1 million people out of the over 300 million in the diaspora, just 1 million to commit to $83 a month. That's $1 billion a year. Now let's make it 5 million people. Let's make it 5 years, 10 years to perpetuity. How do you think the Jews got to be as powerful as they are now after Holocaust? They came together. They understood that sheer survival was in their unity. Not only unity physically, but also financial unity. They pulled their funds together, and they have built a strong, powerful Jewish community. We have examples all around us. Ask for the voices of the Chinese diaspora loud and clear. Ask for the voices of the Indian diaspora, the Irish diaspora, German Americans, Italian Americans, loud and clear. But when you ask for the voices of the African diaspora, you might as well go to the graveyard. We are missing in action. We are waiting for somebody to come take care of our problems because we've been programmed to think that way. Examples that we see every day. Somehow, we don't have the energy to say, we can do it too. We're suffering from the disease of the legacy of slavery and the legacy of colonization. We are in the intensive care, my brothers and sisters. We have got to understand this. We have got to heal ourselves from this disease. Until we do, our ability to help ourselves is always going to be hindered. And that means we all must understand our history and the journey that we have been through. For that, I've written a book that's called Africa 101, The Wake Up Call. I feel very strongly that most of us, we're still in our slumber. We're still fast asleep. We continue to do some of the most stupid things as black people. You tell me why. I get ignored by my own son at the airport when I want my son to help me with my luggage. A young boy who could easily be my son or my grandson. Because they are waiting for the British Airways flight that just landed. White people tip better. They're waiting to wait on the British people that are coming from London, and they ignore me. You tell me why. I'm ignored at a restaurant because of the color of my skin, by one who looks like my own daughter, by one who looks like my own son. Tell me why. I have a better chance of getting a contract in Africa if I have a white man as my partner, if I have a white man sitting next to me when I go for an interview. How insane is that? Tell me why. A black man will go out of business in a black neighborhood the minute a Chinaman comes in. Because we black people will start patronizing the Chinaman. We'll turn it around. Have a black man go to Chinatown. First of all, you're lucky to get a license to start a shop in Chinatown. But any luck should you open a shop in Chinatown, zero Chinese will patronize you. We know all those facts. Why is it that we can't behave like others do? Unity of purpose. My brothers and sisters, may I remind you that we're part of somebody else's strategy designed to see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. Let us be the generation. Let's make a commitment that we are going to be the generation that's going to end this scourge. We are going to be the generation that's going to teach our children that we have been lied to. But we're not going to accept those lies anymore. Let's speak nothing but the truth to our children. We owe it to them. Let's teach our children our history. ADDI is the entity that I hope we can all come together and begin to strategize on how we can take care of our beloved African tree of life that is in the intensive care. We got this. We can do this. Two things we gotta do: unite and bring our financial resources together. All of it will work if we can heal ourselves of the legacy of slavery and the legacy of colonization. Once our minds are awoken, once we understand our history, once we understand the journey that we have been put through, the rest is easy. The rest is easy. And that's why I felt today I should approach all of you. I should reach out to all of you to have this conversation that, well, let's make 2021 the defining moment, the defining year, when we black people are standing up once again and build the Africa that once was. Build the Africa that was once the center of the world. We can do this. We can do this. The beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated, highly adaptable, and total indestructible Africans, we can do this. Without a doubt. We got this. And we owe it to our children, grandchildren, and generations to come. I urge all of you to go to ouraddi.org and join the movement. I also urge you to go to africa101.org. Get yourself a copy of the book that is meant to wake you up, the book that is designed to give it to you like it is, to help you in your journey of self-healing and self-discovery. Happy New Year to all of you. I look forward to engaging all of you in the many webinars that we are going to be having on a weekly, sometimes bi-weekly basis to discuss issues pertaining to us, children of Africa in the diaspora, and what role we can play in building the Africa that we want.
Well, you heard from our lovely mama. Dr. Arikana's message is always powerful and always revolutionary. You even see the heart she has, especially for the African continent, and the potential she sees in the African continent. But for a very long time, we've had all these root causes without actually understanding what really is the main issue that we're facing in Africa. And she has really highlighted well that we have some of the issues above the ground, and we have some of the issues that are the root causes. And when you talk about this wonderful tree, a wonderful tree of Africa that is ailing, but we know what is really making it ill. Talk about the issues above the ground that he has touched on, be it leadership. We've had presidents over the years since the colonization, but we haven't seen any significant changes yet in terms of Africa independence. And she calls it actually fake independence because we have never been independent as Africa. Talk about corruption cases that we've had in the African continent. Mention any country that is not corrupt in Africa. It's really sad to see after 60 years, we're still talking about Africa becoming, many countries in Africa becoming the next Singapore, but yet we aren't talking about the issues that are making Africa not become the next Singapore. She has also mentioned on the systems, talk about the bad education systems that we have, the poor health systems that we still have, the poor infrastructure system that we still have in the African continent. Africa is the richest continent, yet we're still talking about the poor infrastructure, poor facilities, or poor educational systems. And she goes further to state why these are not the only issues that we're facing at the moment, but what actually led to these issues are some of the root causes, and these are the issues that are below the ground. And this takes us back to our colonizers. What did they leave us with? They came to Africa, and when they landed into Africa with all those Berlin Agreement that they had with Otto von Bismarck in Germany, they split Africa and they had the countries that we have at the moment. But what they did was to make sure that we as Africans saw that what we had as Africa was actually bad, and what the Europeans, in quote, or our colonizers had was the best. And this is why we gave them the leeway to take our lands, to change our educational systems, to change our beliefs, and to change many of our structures. And we lost that African credibility or African identity. So we need to see why they actually came and we accepted them to interfere with that. Our grandfathers and our great grandfathers tried to fight them, and we got the fake independence, but we still have them on board. Talk about the international trade and them having their big organizations in the African countries as some of the thriving businesses. Talk about the resources that they're still taking from Africa to process in their own lands. You'd imagine that, let's say, for example, Kenya is a very good processor of tea, but the end product is not processed here in Kenya. They have to take it in their countries so that they resell it back. So there's not that value addition. Talk about the coal mining and so many other things that she has been able to touch on, which is really, really powerful. And we believe that when each and every African is able to understand some of these root causes and some of these issues that we have above the ground, talk about the leaders that we have not making us thrive or corruption, then Africa will start now having that conversation around making sure that we become truly independent and forget about the fake independence that we've been having for those 60 years and above. So yeah, I hope this video actually opened up your mind as an African to think of what future do we really want for our kids, for our great grandkids, or any future that you might want to see in the African continent. I mean, it's been a while now and we really need to see change. And this change cannot be driven by our leaders, but it needs to be driven by everyone, each and everyone, starting from me, myself, you, your brother, your sister, or any other African that you need to keep this message going, and especially for the Africans in diaspora, because we feel like you're actually leaving us on our own. We really need your support. We really need you to come back home and invest home so that we make Africa to be great. Yeah, so that was my time. Africa is Marwa comes to a close, but without leaving. First of all, if you haven't subscribed, I mean, what are you still waiting for? Thank you very much for the wonderful support. We're now at more than 1,400 subscribers. I mean, we still keep on going and we still keep on spreading the message of true Pan-African voices. So if you haven't subscribed yet, I mean, you're missing a lot. And if you haven't hit on that notification bar, I mean, what are you still waiting for? Don't you want to get the video on your timeline? So kindly do so. And Africa is Marwa will see you on the next episode. So bye at the moment.